This conversation really is kind of exhausting because like I am at that age where people keep asking me like when you gonna have kids. Oh! And I'm at that point where it's like if you have them, you have them. If you don't, you don't. But overall, I don't want the burden of children, especially because like a lot of people always talk about the finances, which is a big factor, but also I feel like we don't always talk about the village. Like a lot of people don't have the village they used to have like back in the day. Like back in the day, you had your grandmother, which was your parents. By the time you had kids, most of your grandparents will already be like retired, so they could watch the kids or pick them up from school while you was able to still go to work, and then you go pick up the kids later at your parents' house and then take them home, and then they could help them start with their homework and stuff like that. Like that was my childhood, where nowadays grandparents are still at work. Grandparents can't retire yet. So now you like pushing the age back further and further. Like I'm in my 30s, so this would be a good time to have children if I decided to. But overall, like, do you really want the burden? There's so much with my life that I feel like I haven't done yet that I don't know if I'm ready to sacrifice my life for children, because I feel like I still haven't lived enough to want to just be having children just because. And then with the world today, do I feel comfortable leaving my child out here and just hoping for the best? I don't know about that. Daycare is like $2,100. People playing out the gazoo. It ain't like I'm a qualify for any benefits. And then like, unless your wife or husband or whatever you like stay at home, how can you really sustain the current day economy and take off with the maternity leave and then go right back into work, and you got a whole baby, like you got a child that you have to tend to until they get to a point where they're able to be by themselves? Like, I don't know, people just not thinking this through. But we are living in a time where this is the lowest birth rates uh, in American history. Like, I mean, it's not shocking though, because of everything that's going on. What they thought we all was just gonna be popping them out like Skittles still or something. I just don't understand. Like, why do the older generation not understand why we not having kids? Like, what? I don't know what they missing. Like, I don't know. Sometimes I swear I think they live somewhere else in their head or whatever, or they haven't came to 2026. They still living in the 1980s or something.
The birth rate has declined because guess what? I would rather go on vacation than have a kid.
Explain the link between birth rates falling and people's finances.
A lot of the next generation is saying, I don't want that burden. Yes, do I think a child will likely be a positive add to my life? Maybe, but I can barely make ends meet as it is right now for me. I can barely take care of myself. Why would I add one more cost? That's why the average family size is also shrinking. Not to say that like some people are just choosing not to have children, but like families that otherwise would have had 4 kids are now having 2. Families that were having 2 are now having 1. We were made a promise. If you work hard in school, if you do well, if you go to uni, if you get a good job, you will have enough money every year to make all your ends meet, go on 1 to 2 good vacations with your loved ones. You should be able to afford a family, and the cycle continues. And at some point, you will be able to own a little piece of this earth of your own. Okay, well, young people don't feel like they can own houses. They can't afford them. They can barely feel like they can afford cars.
Can I ask a personal question? Where are you on this?
So my husband and I, 2 years ago, actually froze embryos together because I'm 32 now. I recognize that like time is not particularly on my side. Like, I am very much still in the climbing phase of my career. And if a fairy godmother came tomorrow and like the stork dropped a baby in my arms, I don't even know what I would do. I'm traveling every week right now. However, I did think it was important for me to get an insurance policy on potentially being able to have them, because I want to have that option. But say I want to have that option at 38, 42, my body may betray me. And so I wanted to have that insurance policy. I think my life could be fulfilled without children, but I think it could be meaningfully improved with them as well.
Why is the birth rate so low in 2026? What do you mean you don't want to have kids? You're telling me you don't want sleepless nights, endless tantrums, messy diapers, and the privilege of paying for outrageous childcare costs? You're telling me you don't want embarrassing maternity leave or non-existent paternity leave? You don't want to bring a baby into a country where the parents are expected to be back at work before the baby can even hold her head up? Where mothers are expected to care for everyone before they've even recovered emotionally, physically, or mentally? Honestly, what's your problem? You don't want the American dream?
You don't want to fulfill your God-given destiny to procreate? You don't want your body to be permanently changed, organ shifts, skin stretches, pelvic floor weakens. Many women never fully return to how they felt before, regardless of how they work out. You don't want a traumatic birth, labor and delivery, tearing, emergency C-sections, hemorrhaging. Birth is one of the most physically dangerous things a human can do in 2026. You don't want to recover from postpartum? That affects 1 in 5 women, is brutal and ignored. You're handed a baby and expected to function while your body is essentially healing from a major medical event with zero mandatory rest. You don't want your hormones hijacked for years? Pregnancy, postpartum, and breastfeeding hormones can cause depression, anxiety, rage, brain fog, and personality changes that last years, not weeks. You don't want to never sleep again? Sleep deprivation is a form of torture. Late night feedings every 2 to 3 hours for months on end is literally used as a military interrogation tactic. You don't want the constant mental overload of appointments, school schedules, developmental milestones, meal planning that lives in your brain 24/7 with no clocking out. You don't want your career to take a huge hit. Women's earnings drop an average of 30% after having children, while men's actually increase, called the motherhood penalty versus the fatherhood bonus. You don't want to pay childcare costs? It's not that expensive. It's just $1,500 to $3,000 per month per child, and many women's entire salaries go straight to childcare. You don't want financial devastation? The average cost of raising one child from birth to 18 in the US is now over $300,000, and that's before college. You don't want that? You don't want your relationship to change dramatically because studies show that marital satisfaction drops significantly after having children, and women initiate 70% of divorce? You don't want that? You don't want becoming invisible as a person because your only identity is mom and society expects you to be grateful for it? It's weird. You don't want the American dream?
I'm wanting to let the birth rate plummet to hell. So when the birth rate numbers came out this spring and it said that we were at an all-time low in the United States, I was obviously happy. But lots of women are becoming child-free or just staying child-free. And the numbers of teens are also plummeting, which is amazing. But what are some other reasons why women are remaining child-free? Why are these numbers plummeting to hell? Slate put out an article earlier this month. It says, "We need more good men. Conservatives often lay the blame for declining fertility at women's feet. They're wrong." All right, so this article is a little long. Go ahead and grab you a beverage and a snack. I'm about to read through this. She says, "The summer I turned 39, my husband and I moved from Brooklyn to a darling little village in upstate New York. Our parents were thrilled, their unspoken hope that leaving the big city might be a sign that we were settling down. But as my fertility began to sunset, we turned one of our house 3 bedrooms into a nursery, and we were having that conversation too. We owned a home with ample space and an affordable mortgage. I worked for myself and had maximal flexibility. He had good health insurance and a great, if demanding, job. Did we want to have a baby? As late summer melted into a vibrant fall, then into a cold of upstate winter, I knew my answer: no. My husband worked in the city 3 days a week. I worked from home. I pictured my haggard self pacing our living room, begging a wailing infant to please calm down, alone in our big house, trying to figure out how to shovel the snow out of our driveway before packing the baby into the car and driving 20 minutes to the grocery store on icy country roads. In this picture, I am despondent, resentful, rageful, and the image was informed by the fact that I saw, in real time, the fellow transplant friends we invited to dinner scrambling to find a babysitter in our small town and inevitably coming up empty. I listened to their appreciation for our little community, but I witnessed the frustration at the lack of childcare, the lack of diversity, the lack of ease that had characterized their lives back in the city. I also saw a life, a career, and a marriage I treasured, and I imagined all of the ways in which having a child would compromise what I had spent decades building. I didn't have a deep desire for a child, just a generalized sense that I should consider it before it became impossible. But the sacrifices it would take to make parenting possible simply didn't feel worth it. A child would surely be wonderful in many ways, but I also looked in at myself as a mother through the leaded glass pane of our very lovely living room windows, and I saw a washed out woman worn down to the thinnest thread. And then we moved again. A job change took us to Hong Kong, where the rents are high, but childcare is high quality and reasonable. Our parent friends there traveled often. They held interesting full-time jobs. Dinners were not canceled for lack of babysitters. I pictured myself as a mother, this time through the square frame of my little box of an apartment stacked among thousands of others in Hong Kong's endless high-rises. A partner who was an equal participant at home and now had reasonable work hours and a very short commute. A doctor's office within walking distance, a 2-minute stroll to the grocery store, parks and promenades, nannies and preschools, excellent health care that wouldn't bankrupt us. Delivering a baby in Hong Kong's best public hospital will cost you roughly $50. You can pay the bill with your Metro card. The question of whether or not to try to have a child shifted away from logistics and toward desire. As Republicans and Democrats alike grapple with the declining birth rates and the economic impacts of an aging population, the consensus seems to be that people should have more babies. The right has generally coalesced around a strategy of blaming, shaming, and bullying, blaming white women for not marrying or reproducing, shaming women whose lives don't follow a traditional path, bullying young women into traditionalism with threats that they will wind up, per Vice President J.D. Vance, as childless cat ladies whose lives lack purpose and have no investment in the nation or its future. Democrats have done better in terms of talking about paid parental leave and universal health care, but at the end of the day, they've barely budged the policy needle. The policy laundry list pushed by Democrats and progressives is no doubt the right way forward, but leaders on both sides of the political aisle need to start thinking about these issues differently. How do we increase birth rates is a question that can come with a lot of ugly answers, as well as many unintended consequences. Banning abortion, it turns out, has coincided not just with an increase in the abortion rate, but has caused a number of fertility-ending complications for women who are trying to have children. But those of us who support abortion rights also tend to support true reproductive choice and need to grapple with the reality that many people are not able to choose to have the families they desire. Nearly 40% of Americans over 50 without children say they wanted them at some point. An additional 24% say they weren't sure. When it comes to fertility, politicians should focus on how they can expand what Americans see as possible. First thing first, there's no acceptable policy or intervention that will take American women back to the days of having an average of 3, 4, 5, or more children apiece. Declining rates are a global phenomenon and occurring in the world's most generous social welfare states in Scandinavia, as well as in the welfare wasteland of the United States, in highly religious nations in the Middle East and Latin America, as well as in secular societies across Western Europe, in African countries crushed by poverty, as well as in Asian ones where middle-class wealth has exploded. Conservatives are correct that high levels of religiosity tend to correlate with childbearing, though it tends to be highly religious and insular minority groups in which women marry quite young that are driving the baby booms, a dynamic that plays out in places like Israel and Utah. The conservative lesson from this has been to push young marriage and, by extension, young childbearing. The Heritage Foundation, for example, has a plan to pay young people if they marry early and reproduce quickly. They'd get the money by cutting welfare benefits to poor single moms. The shift away from young marriage, though, does not seem to be about needing money to start a marriage, but rather about a culture that now gives women much more autonomy to pursue their own interests and goals. Liberals generally do not aim to coerce women into the kind of one track lives that so many found dissatisfying and that sparked the second wave feminist movement in the first place. A good life looks many different ways to many different people who make up America, and the question of whether or not to have a child is one approach with just as much diversity, but there is still work to be done to understand what makes the choice to have a child or another child feel possible. Plenty of people know for sure that they want children, and from what I have anecdotally observed, people in this group are likely to make significant sacrifices to get there, to relocate to a cheaper place, to marry out of alignment, if not overwhelming love, to pursue single parenthood if a partner doesn't materialize, to cobble together childcare or rearrange work lives or move closer to grandparents. These are not the people who need to be convinced that parenthood is desirable, but this is the group that needs support to achieve their goal. Right now, the barriers of finding a suitable partner, housing costs, healthcare access, childcare availability, and so on lead to delays in reproduction, which may in turn lead to having fewer children. Beginning childbearing at 35 instead of 27 leaves fewer years to decide to have additional children if one desires. This drives the birth rate declines too. The whole one and done thing is real, and many people, many women, see that their partner is inefficient or unhelpful during that first child or during that first pregnancy. So that's the reason why many women are one and done. A second group of would-be parents are those I think of as the yes ifs. Yes, I would like to be a parent, but only if I find the right partner. Yes, I would like to be a parent, but only if I can provide a child with a solid middle-class life. Yes, I would like to be a parent, but only if I can continue working in a job I love or residing in a city where I built my core community or living in a way that feels full of meaning from many different directions. The ifs differ. For some would-be parents, saying yes to a baby may require staying put near friends, a job, or parents. For others, it might mean being able to afford to move to a nice town with good schools or into a single-family home. For some, the if might be the part-time work or flexible work or remote work. For others, it might be a higher paying job. Anecdotally, for straight women, at least one big if is finding a partner who they love, who is self-sufficient, and who would make a good father. The third group is the truly ambivalent, where I sit. I cannot speak to what might break the ambivalence of every undecided person, but I can say that for me, I needed to see a critical mass of people around me parenting in a way that looked not just technically doable, but actually desirable. In the US, I saw many wonderful parents who adored their children and were no doubt happy with their choices, and whose lives, to me, looked universally stressful and often limited, and were simply not how I wanted to live. People may also find themselves moving between these categories and may need different policies and interventions to allow them to say yes to a child. A person who was a yes or even ambivalent for a first kid may be a yes if for a second or third, willing to do it, but only if the right circumstances line up. Importantly, many of the solutions that will help one group at one time might also help another group at a different time. For example, some people might be more inclined to have a first baby if they could stay in their chosen city, but may find a desire for a larger house in a less urban area arises along with wanting a second child. There is a final group too, the hard no's, whose assuredness should be respected. Policies shouldn't be focused on convincing or penalizing the intentionally child-free. Leave these people alone. As I wandered through the reproductive wilderness, I could not separate the question of whether I wanted a child from the reality of the rest of my life. That I would not simply be adding a child to a life that felt intensely satisfying and deeply meaningful, but rather engaging in a kind of impossible math. On one side of the ledger, money, time, adventure, work that delighted me, friendships that sustained me, and a marriage that thrilled me. On the other, a baby and a universe of emotional experience I understood would be profound and interesting, but that I could not fully or frankly, even partially imagine, let alone quantify on my mental balance sheet. The job of politicians who either want Americans to have more children or simply want them to feel like they have the option is to render this calculus immaterial. People will be more likely to become parents if they sense that children will be fun and meaning-making additions to an already full existence, not the beginning of an end to the lives they created. For policymakers, this centers around two themes: money and time. To say yes to a child or more children, most people need to believe that they can afford it. And those who are on the fence can define afford as afford without sacrificing everything else in my life I care about. And people need to believe they have time for children. If a person feels they cannot parent well because their job is too demanding and their workday has no end, because they are already caring for aging parents without support, because the care demands of existing children are simply too high, then a child or additional children feels less possible. This is why childcare routinely comes up on the list of must-haves for American parents, and for good reason. The affordability of high-quality childcare outside of the U.S. is what made having a child begin to feel possible for me, and the type of childcare matters. Americans have largely heard about the famous French crèche system of public daycares, but the French government also subsidizes the kind of one-on-one home care that many parents of infants prefer. High-quality local daycares, cost-adjusted to income, plus the ability to take adequate parental leave, 6 to 9 months, seems to be the sweet spot. And then have a nanny for the youngest children is the kind of childcare policy that could really push the yes-ifs over the edge, or allow existing parents to decide that having another baby is doable. Then there is work. Since COVID, remote work has become the new normal for many Americans. Work from home policies are controversial, and critics rightly point out that for non-parents, remote work is isolating and can drive declines in mental health. But perhaps the creativity we need to have about remote work will also help us start incentivizing or legally requiring predictable schedules, flex time, and paid sick leave and vacation. Housing is also key to making parenthood seem possible. This means families need the kind of affordable single-family housing in good school districts that characterize the dreams of so many boomer parents. But it also means more affordable 2- and 3-bedroom apartments in desirable cities so that adults can stay in the communities they choose and love even if they have kids. As someone who spent her 20s in New York City and hates to drive, the thought of being a car seat mom was surprisingly a big barrier to even thinking about having a child. And affordable urban housing can make parenting visible. Humans are social primates, and our perceptions of what's normal or desirable are shaped by those around us. But speaking of visibility, even though so much of the hand-wringing around fertility rates has been about how women's lives have changed in the past few decades, there's a more obvious target. Of all the conditions that make childbearing seem possible, one is the most deceptively simple: the increasing number of men who would make good fathers. For better or worse, significant shares of women seem to have internalized what conservative family researchers call the success sequence: a job, then marriage, then kids. Among the over 50 Americans who do not have children, one Pew survey found that the number one reason they gave was that it just didn't happen. But the number two reason was that they didn't find the right partner. Most people who have children still have them in the context of marriage, and many others have them in the context of a loving and stable relationship. When there aren't marriageable or even dateable men around, fewer women marry and have children, a dynamic that has been particularly pronounced in America's working class. Despite a significant proportion of American births to single mothers, the number of unmarried women giving birth has actually been decreasing for the past decade, with the decline largely driven by teenagers and working class women. Without men they see as marriageable, some working class women have children alone. A growing number just aren't having kids at all. The one group seeing an uptick in unmarried births, women with college degrees who are also much more likelier to have children later in their reproductive years. The missing men of the American marriage market, as one NPR story recently put it, is driven by the scores of men who lack well paid work or have fallen into addiction or criminality. Women have long outnumbered men on college campuses and earned a much larger share of degrees. And many of these college educated women are now marrying non college educated men, but they're marrying the most stable and high earning among them, leaving non college educated women with a pool of men who are less likely to be gainfully employed and stable and more likely to be unemployed, addicted, or otherwise troubled. In the meantime, the men who are having kids are better dads than ever, spending more time with their children and taking more pleasure in parenting. There are more ways to see this data, but from my vantage point, it suggests that men have indeed become better fathers and that today's more liberal and better educated women are selecting for more egalitarian, emotionally present partners. This was true for me. I have a husband who, if we're going to do the parenting thing, wanted to do it well. This trend is great for both the women these men marry and the children they raise. But in a country where politics polarize partly along gender lines and scores of young men are turning to reactionary misogyny, women, rightly, refusing to tolerate less than egalitarian and evolved mates does not bode well for more children being born generally. Any efforts to fuel fertility need to take this reality into account, and not by telling women to lower their standards. Democrats have long searched for a model of positive masculinity, but the birth rate obsessed conservatives needed more. Just think about the rise of conservative manosphere peeled men and how that worldview has been welcomed and even celebrated in today's MAGA fueled GOP. This is a cultural project as much as a political one. If we want more babies, we need more men women are willing to have babies with. There are policy solutions to this. Getting men to higher rates of gainful employment would help. We should expand technical programs and fund paid apprenticeships, raise the federal minimum wage, penalize companies who undercut workers' wages, or rely on underemployment schemes to get out of paying benefits as part of what should be full-time roles, and hold companies accountable when they slash human jobs in favor of automation or AI. As perhaps counterintuitive as it sounds, restoring abortion rights and contraception access is crucial here too. Majority male legislatures intruding on women's reproductive choices is all part of the same swamp of misogynist contempt for women's autonomy and humanity. Broadcasting to men that they have the right to dictate every woman's most basic and private choices fosters a culture of dehumanization of women and entitlement among men that is not exactly conducive to the relationships of equals that women seek. The truth is that many nations with generous family policies also see low birth rates, but the U.S. is an extraordinary and unusual nation in many ways, and we remain a nation in which many people say they want to have children and do not actually have them. There is also a particular psychology that comes along with being offered a long-desired benefit. The women of Scandinavia might take paid leave and universal childcare for granted, but a lot of Americans would be thrilled to see such policies implemented. And with more possibilities open in front of them, they may be eager to take advantage, but they'll want a good man along for the ride. This was a long post. And once we got to the end of the post, we started to see the meat of the reality of where women are. Women need a man who's going to be egalitarian. What we see on a day-to-day basis are women on team do too much. They are being worn down to the nub because they're having to be the project managers of the home. They're having to be the brains of the relationship. They're having to take on full-time jobs and come home and do the majority of the unpaid labor. That has to change. That has to change culturally. We have got to get to the point where men don't need to be told vacuum, figure out what's for dinner, figure out how to make doctor's appointments. We got to get to the point where women don't have to do all of these things. And the whole red pill, Theo bros, MAGA, women do not like these men. Women simply do not like these men. Those men are having a hard time connecting with women because they literally suck. They do not like or value women. They dehumanize women. They see women as less than. And so women who actually value themselves don't like those people. So, yeah, maybe men should change. I absolutely love this article. It is very long, obviously. I did get through it, but sometimes we need to see what's going on. They need a bigger worldview, and they need to simply talk to women. All right, y'all, go ahead and chime in and let me know what you think about all of this.